So YouTube has age restricted my video exposing Sky News. Am I surprised? No. I was expecting it. This is exactly the price that you have to pay for holding the powerful accountable and exposing their dirty nexus. And you know the funniest thing? The penalty was imposed on my video just when its views were skyrocketing. We had crossed about 150,000 views when YouTube informed me that this video is now suited for only 18 plus viewers. Only they can watch this video and it will not be eligible for monetization. That means that anybody who want to watch this video again, you will have to prove that you are 18 plus. You will have to share your personal document, identity document. You know it, I know it, nobody is going to bother about it. So therefore, there won't be any more views to this video. I have uploaded the edited version of this video on my personal YouTube account. They had deleted my personal YouTube account as well, so I had to recreate it. So I have uploaded this video there. If you want to watch it, the details are there on the screen. You can go and watch this video on my personal channel. And I suggest you also subscribe to this channel, because the kind of time that we are living in, it's important to have an equally popular alternative channel. This is also a reminder to all of you who care about honest journalism and this platform. I'm ever so grateful to all of you for your support. Without your support, I wouldn't be here. This platform wouldn't be here. But there's a request to all of you. You need to do more. You need to support our journalism in your own way if you want this platform to continue to grow. If you really, really want this platform to continue to grow. Your support can be through buymecoffee.com, PayPal, or Patreon. But it's absolutely important that the future of our journalism is not decided by YouTube or any other third-party platform or corporate entity. This will be really sad if we allow a corporate entity to stop us from telling the truth. Anyway, let's return to today's topic. There have been plenty of reports in the pro-Israel Western media claiming that Qatar has asked Hamas to shut down its office in Doha. And Qatar has also told its leaders, Hamas leaders, to immediately leave the country unless they agree to a ceasefire in Gaza. According to these Western media, pro-Zionist, pro-Israeli media outlets. These are some of the headlines carried by Western media outlets, and I'm sharing them here for you to truly understand the sickening propaganda to support Israel's genocidal campaign. A headline by UK's right-wing newspaper, The Telegraph, read, and I quote, Qatar orders Hamas to leave in major blow to terror group's leaders. End of quote. Sky News went ahead with this headline, and I quote, Qatar tells Hamas it won't host group's political office unless Gaza ceasefire talks with Israel improve. End of quote. This is what Times of Israel wrote in its headline, and I quote, Diplomat says Qatar quitting Gaza mediation role, Hamas to be booted from country. End of quote. CNN, the American media outlet, wanted to beat the competition. So it decided to deploy 4 of its staff members to write one headline, which read, and I quote, Qatar agrees to kick Hamas out of Doha following US request, sources say. End of quote. So CNN deployed 4 staff members to write a headline based on sources, unnamed sources. Brilliant journalism, gold standard journalism of these Western media outlets, pro-Israel, pro-Zionist media outlets. This tells you everything, doesn't it, about the journalism of these Western media platforms. So what's the truth? All these media outlets needed to do one thing before running their propaganda. That was to ask the Qatari government for confirmation or denial. But then this would cease to be a propaganda, wouldn't it? Here is what Al Jazeera, a media outlet owned by the Qatari government, reported.
In a statement, the Qatari Foreign Ministry denied media reports it's withdrawing from the process, but said Qatar will resume efforts when the parties show their willingness and seriousness to end the brutal war and the ongoing suffering of civilians. The ministry said Qatar will not be blackmailed and that ongoing negotiations can't be used as an excuse to continue the war on Gaza. The Foreign Ministry has also said media reports saying it's asked Hamas to close its political office in Doha are not accurate.
Now, what Al Jazeera did, it just read out the official statement coming from the Qatari government. That's all these pro-Israeli media outlets had to do. Now, have you seen any apology from these media outlets that carried fake headlines to protect Israel? No. Listen to Middle East expert Marwan Bishara, who explains why Qatar has been left frustrated, and it has nothing to do with Hamas.
The Qatari Foreign Ministry is saying it's suspending its mediation efforts, but not completely pulling out. What does this suggest to you about what's been happening, and what might it mean?
Well, look, it seems that 10 days ago when the parties were in Doha, the Americans, the Israelis, and so on, the Qataris basically were fed up after one failure after another and realizing even the latest round of negotiations were not serious. And so they told them, look, we're done here. I mean, call us when you are serious. Call us when you're serious, and we'll go back and figure out what to do with the last agreement we reached. Because clearly there's a sense here that some, notably the Israelis, I would say, have been using the diplomatic process as a cover in order to continue with the war. I mean, here we are 400 days later, genocide continues to unravel, and we've only had one deal much earlier in the year.
Bishara is essentially referring to Blinken's last trip to Doha, where he spoke to media with Qatari Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Al Thani. If you watch what the Qatari Prime Minister had to say in that press conference, you will see that it was clear that he was frustrated by the continuous deadlock to his country's mediation work created by Netanyahu. Mind you, this was after the death of Yahya Sinwar. So both Blinken and Netanyahu had no excuses on the ceasefire talks.
Answering to your question, whether we see Sinwar as an obstacle, I need to be very clear and very mindful that our role as a mediator, we fully respect it, and our policy, we don't speak about any party who would represent the obstacle and start, to point on one over the other yet. We have, throughout the process that we've been through in mediation in different fronts, we have never seen something like this being in the media more in the negotiation room. So you can go throughout the process and you can see on each stage where it's stopped, and it will be very clear who's stopping at each stage of that. So I just wanted to make sure that there is nothing from Qatar will say on one party or another. Regarding our communication with Hamas and the leadership after Sinwar, yes, we re-engaged with them. We've been in engagement with the representative from the political office in Doha. We had some meetings with them the last couple of days. I believe that until now, there is no clarity what will be the way forward or the clear position. But the position that we had with us, at least throughout the meeting or what we have sensed, it was the same position as the last paper stated. And basically, I think this would be their starting point until they come up with a further position.
Let's look at the chronology of events on the so-called ceasefire deal in Gaza. This is what Joe Biden has said on 31st of May when he first proposed a ceasefire on Gaza.
It's a roadmap to an enduring ceasefire and the release of all hostages. This proposal has been transmitted by Qatar to Hamas. Today, I want to lay out its terms for the American citizens and for the world. This new proposal has 3 phases. 3. The first phase would last for 6 weeks. Here's what it would include: a full and complete ceasefire, a withdrawal of Israeli forces from all populated areas of Gaza, release of a number of hostages, including women, the elderly, the wounded, in exchange for release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. There are American hostages who would be released at this stage, and we want them home. Additional, some remains of hostages who have been killed would be returned to their families, bringing some degree of closure to that terrible grief. Palestinians, civilians would return to their homes and neighborhoods in all areas of Gaza, including in the north. Humanitarian assistance would surge, with 600 trucks carrying aid into Gaza every single day. With the ceasefire, that aid could be safely and effectively distributed to all who need it. Hundreds of thousands of temporary shelters, including housing units, would be delivered by the international community. All that and more would begin immediately. During the 6 weeks of phase 1, Israel and Hamas would negotiate the necessary arrangements to get to phase 2, which is a permanent end to hostilities. Now, I'll be straight with you. There are a number of details to negotiate to move from phase 1 to phase 2. Israel will want to make sure its interests are protected. But the proposal says if the negotiations take longer than 6 weeks, for phase 1, the ceasefire will still continue as long as negotiations continue. In the United States, Egypt, and Qatar would work to ensure negotiations keep going. All agreements, until all the agreements are reached and phase 2 is able to begin. Then phase 2, there'd be an exchange for the release of all remaining living hostages, including male soldiers. Israeli forces would withdraw from Gaza, and as long as Hamas lives up to its commitments, a temporary ceasefire would become, in the words of the Israeli proposal, the cessation of hostilities permanently, end of quote. Cessation of hostilities permanently. Finally, in phase 3, a major reconstruction plan for Gaza would commence, and any final remains of hostages who've been killed would be returned to their families. That's the offer that's now on the table, and what we've been asking for. It's what we need. The people of Israel should know they can make this offer without any further risk to their own security because they've devastated Hamas forces over the past 8 months. At this point, Hamas no longer is capable of carrying out another October 7th, which is one of Israel's main objectives in this war, and quite frankly, a righteous one.
Hamas leader had said that they had accepted every single aspect of the deal proposed by Biden, but Benjamin Netanyahu remained an obstacle, since he didn't want this ceasefire to happen at all. If anything, he decided to add more conditions by saying that Israeli military will remain in the Philadelphia corridor and central Gaza. Of course, this was not going to be acceptable to Hamas. How can this be acceptable? It is not a ceasefire when you still have the presence of Israeli terrorists in your region, in your country, in your territory. But instead of using its leverage to force Netanyahu to agree for a ceasefire, the Biden administration's key representatives, such as Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, kept misleading the world media by claiming that 90% agreement had been reached.
So you're right that's exactly what I said in June, and you're also right that since then there have been intervening events, and I think that only underscores something truly essential, which is that as close as we have gotten, and as close as I believe we are to getting a ceasefire agreement, every day that goes by where it is not finalized and the parties don't say yes, period, is a day in which something else happens. And there is an intervening event, which simply pushes things off and runs the risk of derailing what is a pretty fragile apple cart. So the experience that we've had over the last couple of months, where there's been extraordinary work done to get a framework agreement that both parties signed on to, then to work to fill in some of the gaps because the framework agreement doesn't have every detail in it. That remained to be negotiated, things that need to be implemented. We've been doing that work. And I think based on what I've seen, 90% is agreed. But there are a few critical issues that remain where we need to be able to get agreement. And they really go to how certain aspects of the agreement would be implemented. And I think much of this has been discussed in recent days, including the Philadelphia corridor, including some of the how hostages and prisoners are exchanged. So that remains, but pretty much everything else is there. So at this point, it seems to me that it's really incumbent on both parties.
It's moving hour by hour, and I haven't gotten an update in the last several hours. What I would say is that the negotiators are bearing down on the details, meaning that we have advanced the discussions to a point where it's in the nitty-gritty, and that is a positive sign of progress. But at the end of the day, nothing is done until it's done. And so we're just going to keep working at this until we finally get the ceasefire and hostage deal across the line. And I'll have the chance when I get on the plane to check in with our negotiating team who's participating in these talks in the region even as we speak.
Now, if you remember, I had called out their lies then. And it's crystal clear now that these warmongers were lying all along. This was all to allow Israelis to carry out its carnage in Gaza and expand their genocide to the occupied West Bank and Lebanon. As I said it in the past, a ceasefire will end the political career of Netanyahu, as the attention will then shift to his domestic politics and his corruption cases. The chap might even be jailed. The reason why I call Anthony Blinken a war criminal is because he's been helping Netanyahu slaughter more Palestinians despite knowing his dirty plan. Don't tell me that Blinken has not been aware. He was not aware. He's been aware. He knows exactly what Netanyahu wants. Both Blinken and Biden have said that Israel has achieved their so-called objective in Gaza, and yet they continue to kill people. They continue to starve people to death. They continue to target hospitals. They continue to target babies. And this Blinken chap goes around the world and tells media that, look, he's working for the ceasefire. No, you're not working for ceasefire. Because if you were concerned about achieving ceasefire, you could have done it long ago. Thousands of innocent lives could have been saved if Netanyahu was forced to agree to the plan proposed by Biden. But neither the US politicians nor their Western media outlets chose to shame Netanyahu. If anything, they continued to peddle fake propaganda so that more and more Palestinians can be killed by bloodthirsty Netanyahu. And they're still doing that. The reason why I'm making this video is to highlight that propaganda itself. This is the definition of civilized Western world for you. That's it for me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and its journalism on buymecoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.